Hey up guys, it's the Yorkshire Pudding. In an industry obsessed with bigger worlds, more mechanics, oversaturation of items, monsters and endless content, some of the best gaming experiences actually come from doing more with less. Let's talk about why. Too many items, too many bosses, too many creatures, too many quests, too many achievements, too many abilities, too many's. Imagine the following scenario. You're a low level with little to no gear, you're short on supplies, and you're still using the starter sword you got by default. But then you see it, hidden in the corner, a chest. You decide to open it. Two pieces of cloth. Okay, I guess I could make use of this, you think to yourself. But to your surprise, not too far away, there's another chest. You rush to it, hoping that this time you'll get an item that you need. But again, no luck. 3 daisy weeds. Not long after you come along another chest, so you open it again. Come on, third time lucky. After all, I've made a detour for these chests off the main road. There has to be something good in this one. But still you receive yet more junk. Well, at least I can make some cloth armour from the cloth and maybe a potion with the weeds, but this is literally just an item that's meant to be sold straight to the vendor. What even is the point? You ask yourself. This happens not a dozen times, or even a few dozen times, but in fact hundreds of times throughout your playthrough. The chest you once thought was rare is just another obstacle to distract you from playing the rest of the game, and only a couple of times did you actually receive something half decent, like a slight armour upgrade, which you ended up replacing shortly after due to getting yet more armour from a quest or mob anyway. The spam of junk happens not only just with chests, but with every enemy you kill and every task and quest you complete. It gets to the point where you stop looting chests altogether. They're so common there's no need to make a detour for them anyway. It's not usually worth the effort. Even if you do find something useful, the amount of armour churned out by the game, usually just simple reskins or literal clones of each other with slightly differing stats, means that you probably end up getting some better gear before long anyway. Looting the chests becomes a waste of time and looting bodies becomes a chore. You still have to loot everybody just in case you get that rare item, but most of the times the loot's just greys or items you sell straight to the vendor. It removes all the excitement from exploring or getting a new item when most are just filler junk items and the other half are useful, but only for a few minutes of game time before they're quickly replaced by another item. There's no time to build a connection with the gear you have, and no time to appreciate the next step up in gear that you obtain. It's swapped out as quickly as received. A perfect example is Classic vs Retail WoW. In Classic WoW, the enemies you face whilst leveling are genuinely pretty difficult. You need to be careful not to pull too many, as each fight could lead to an unexpected death. Gear is relatively hard to come by, and each upgrade you get feels like you're getting a bit stronger. You get genuinely excited when you get a rare drop, as it's been a while since your last upgrade, so the difference in stats is quite large. You do miss your old robe top, but you feel it's time to part ways and embrace the new robe, which has 4 extra intellect and spirit levels. You also hand in a bunch of quests, and one of them gives you a neat staff. It's been 6 whole levels since you upgraded your staff, and equipping it feels badass. Then when you return to your journey and pull another enemy, you find that you're killing it a bit easier than before, so you decide it's time to pull 2 instead this time, still being very careful in the process. You manage it, and after doing several more quests, spending hours of grinding and killing mobs, you gain another level, and again with it comes a feeling that your character is now stronger, with you being able to now fight 2 enemies at once with greater ease, though still not letting your guard down too much. The process feels like an actual journey where there's a risk of death and resources are scarce. Food and drinks are required to heal health and mana in between pulls, and potions are actually useful, often saving you in sticky situations. This gave me an actual reason to train herbalism and alchemy. Rather than using it just to make a bit of cash at max level, it is now a vital skill used to aid in my adventure. Money is hard to come by, so buying briar thorns from a lesser healing potions isn't an option, nor is buying the potion itself. The briar thorns are also fairly uncommon in Classic, so when I do eventually find one in the wild, it's worth making a V-line for it. I even made use of bandages. I forgot these existed in Retail WoW. Now let's compare this to modern day WoW. You create a level 1 account, that is, if you didn't boost it to max level with real life money. You equip a full set of heirloom gear, giving you a bonus XP and making you super overpowered from the start. You're not worried about dying. Your goal is just to rush through the content as fast as possible. You're not pulling 8 mobs instead of 2 because death is an issue, but you're pulling 8 mobs instead of 2 because you're only focused on getting through the content as fast as possible. AoE them down as much as you can. Go, go, go! You're now level 30 and still haven't needed to upgrade any gear because you have heirlooms. Any gear upgrades you do obtain are irrelevant because the content's already too easy. You don't feel the upgrades like you do in Classic either. Potions, food and drink just clutter up your inventory. Just sell them, or you could destroy them if you want. Money's really easy to obtain anyway. You join a dungeon and none of your team speaks. Everyone's just there doing the same as you, rushing through it as fast as possible, even leaving the loot on the ground as it's not really needed at the start of the game, and the gold you get later on from drops is greater anyway. Before long, congratulations, you've reached max level. I don't want to dwell on the leveling system too much in this video as that's another topic, but the point is you've needed 0 items along the way except for a few gear upgrades maybe in the last few levels before maxing when your heirloom stops scaling with your level, and even at max level I find that over 95% of the loot is just sold straight to the vendor, which only serves as a chore to declutter your inventory and make a bit of cash on the side. Some items can be sold on the auction house, which is like WoW's equivalent of the Grand Exchange, and may be valuable to players training professions, but even with professions, most of the items you create themselves are pretty useless, bar a few. By the way, just to clarify, yeah, I understand you don't have to actually equip the heirlooms, but most players don't like to intentionally handicap themselves. It's like saying, do you wish to take a few extra hours out of your day for literally no reward other than maybe a bit of self-gratification? Probably not. But regardless, heirlooms are besides the point. Retail still has these problems at its core even if heirlooms didn't exist. I feel if supplies are overabundant, then the supplies become pointless. If this is the case, this supply should be removed altogether or make them scarce so that players actually want to collect them. A key theme throughout this video will be focusing on getting players to want to do things rather than having to do things. It's a game after all, it's supposed to be fun, he says, staring at the same tree all day. You can still get the "ooh, there's an item there" experience from a monster without getting the filler loot. Instead of having to loot each and every monster, make it so if a monster drops an item, a slight glowing effect over the monster indicates it as a loot item. Since there's no junk loot, the chances are the item will actually be of some use, yet the end result is that you spend less time looting overall, and you still get the dopamine rush when you see that glow over the monster's body. When it comes to currencies like gold, decrease the frequency of gold drops. This does not need to affect the economy of the game. Instead of 5 monsters dropping 100 coins each, make gold 5 times less common, but make 1 monster drop 500 gold each. The gold gain per hour will still be the same, but you'll spend over 5 times less time looting. And let's face it, looting isn't fun. The chance of getting items is fun, but the actual clicking on the body itself isn't the fun part, let's all admit that. Especially when you need to do it after every kill. The thing is, you'll spend a lot less time looting this way, and when you actually do loot, you're probably going to get something decent. You'll still get the excitement when it glows over the body, and it helps you not look like an airport steward doing a pat down on everybody you see just in case you find something. One more point about items before I move on. How many of you have found consumable items in the game world which can give your character a boost, such as extra attack speed, strength bonuses or fire defense bonus, and you've held on to it, yet by the time you've completed the game you're still left with half of them in the inventory because you've never used them. You've saved them just in case, but that just in case time never really comes. These items feel simultaneously so common they're not exciting when you get them, yet too annoying to farm if needed to make you go, I'll save them later just in case. The end result is an inventory or bank filled with almost all of these left unused by the end of the playthrough. I don't personally think that this adds anything to the game and just serves as bloat. To sum up items, the overabundance makes receiving them lose the charm, makes gear upgrades feel less impactful, creates an unnecessary chore to collect and sell them, clogs up your inventory, and overall does not lead to an improved game experience in my opinion. I've never enjoyed collecting junk items and dislike it when I get to the stage where I no longer feel like it's worth opening chests or looting mobs. One may argue that it adds the RPG aspect in an MMORPG, but I personally do not feel immersed into a world just by carrying an extra 7 blunt swords, 21 boar tusks and a rusty nail. I mean, how did that troll get a rusty nail on him in the first place? When it comes to items, sometimes less is more. Moving on to numbers. This is a bit of a short one. Damage numbers. Why on earth do some developers insist on creating damage hit numbers into the hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions? The human brain finds it hard to visualize and understand really high numbers, especially when there's 7 different 6-digit numbers on the screen all at once. Old school RS does this very well. It's not uncommon to deal damage ranging in between 0 to 50. If you're a Giga Chad, you may even hit above 60 in one hit. When you upgrade a piece of gear, you may find that your max hit is now 48 instead of 46. It's only a minor difference, but the numbers are small enough to comprehend. There's also less visual clutter on the screen at once, making the information easier to process. Look at these two in comparison. Need I say more? The RuneScape community felt so strongly about this point that it actually created an in-game riot in Falador when Jagex changed the hit numbers to 10 times the original amount. For example, you now hit 200 instead of 20. This did mean on paper that you can hit more specific amounts, so rather hitting a 20 or a 21, you could hit anywhere from a 200 to 210, but in practice this is completely unnecessary in my opinion, though I could see arguments for it. However, what does get ridiculous is when the numbers are in the millions as mentioned earlier. I mean, can you really process the difference between hitting 1,364,721 and hitting 1,362,927, all in a split second when there's also a bunch of other numbers on the screen at the same time and you're in the heat of battle? I don't feel any more powerful hitting 1,456,333 instead of hitting 1,444,782 compared to hitting a 36 instead of a 33. In fact, I appreciate it a lot more with the second example. I don't even notice it in the first. When it comes to hit numbers, sometimes less is more. Bosses and enemies. Elden Ring is a fantastic game. It won Game of the Year for a good reason. I had an amazing time playing it and it does most things right. But to those who have played it, did it really need all those dungeons with reskin mini-bosses at the end of every one of them? Did it really bring you more joy after fighting the same mini-boss for the 4th time in a different location and after fighting similar mobs in a dungeon that looked only slightly different to the one before it? For me, this was one of the only parts in the game I genuinely got bored with. I still did every dungeon I could find, of course, just in case one of them may be a bit different, but I couldn't help but think that most dungeons were unnecessary, and every reskinned boss I fought felt like it devalued the first one. It went from, ooh, that was an interesting mini-boss, that were pretty fun to kill, to, oh, it looks like I'm fighting him again. I swear I've seen him 3 times before. If the developers cut the number of dungeons in half and made each boss different to the previous, the game would have gone from a 9.5 to a 10 in my opinion, because this was possibly the only qualm I had with the entire game. The game went on a little too long, and I feel without these extra filler dungeons, the pace would have been a lot smoother. If there were less dungeons and no reskins, I would have appreciated each dungeon a lot more and be excited for the unique mini-boss that had waited me at the end, rather than thinking, oh dear, it's one of these again. I appreciate that creating a new mini-boss for each dungeon would take developers a bit extra time, but surely they'd also save time by making less dungeons overall. There should have been a focus on quality, not quantity when it came to dungeons, because everything else in the game sure was quality. Reskinning bosses is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it makes perfect sense. For example, in Sekiro, warning, if you've not played this game yet, skip ahead 20 or 30 seconds, you fight Ishin, the Sword Saint, right at the start. You are defeated by him of course, but throughout your game you level up your stats and gain experience in combat. After your hard fought journey, at the end of the game you finally face him one last time, where hopefully this time you defeat him. Yes, this boss is technically a reskin, but in this case it makes perfect sense for the story and in a way shows you how far you've come from the start. Fighting the same reskin mini-boss on the other hand in different parts of the world only serves as filler content, and in my opinion would be better left out altogether, even if this means less overall mini-bosses to fight. In more open world games like World of Warcraft, scarcity is a tool they could use for certain bosses, mini-bosses and regular mobs. Which of the following provides a more exciting experience? Imagine you have a ginormous lake. In it you see several enemies resembling Loch Ness monsters. They're abundant, easy to find, and they're always present, respawning shortly after dying. If you bump into one on the way to the other side, you have no problem taking it out, just like most other mobs in the game. You can even pull multiple at the time because why not? They're not particularly dangerous. Or you may even be watching YouTube videos on the other tab whilst your character has auto run turned on. You safely make it to the other side with ease. Now imagine the same ginormous lake, but this time you've heard from other players that there's a Loch Ness monster somewhere in this lake who is extremely dangerous, providing too much of a challenge for lone players wandering through, and even giving groups of high level players a tough time. The lake is very deep and wide. If you were to dive, the water underneath becomes darker and deeper as you swim, until eventually you cannot see where you're going or what's in it. Your goal is not to kill the monster, you just want to reach the other side of the lake. You've never seen this monster for yourself before and question its existence because it's so rare. You may not even see it within a few hours of questing in or around the lake. There's regular fish of course and creatures around the lake, but fight them in the lake at your own peril because the monster may be lurking nearby. You stand on the edge of the lake, planning your route and thinking of places to swim if things go wrong. You scan the surface of the water to see if you can spot the monster's neck above the surface. Your vision underwater is too murky, so this is the best you can do. There's no sign of the beast, so you decide to take the shortest way across the lake to minimise the time you're in the water. You start swimming as fast as you can, with each stroke filling you with anxiety, as any moment may be the last if you attract the monster. You're almost at the other side, yet in your head you're reminded of every Jaws movie you've ever watched. Finally, you've reached the other side and breathe a sigh of relief. You've made it. Later that day, you're on top of a hill and look back admiring the view, only to see some young noob make the same journey you did across the lake, though he was not as lucky this time, being dragged underwater by the monster. This second scenario does not necessarily involve combat whatsoever, yet the level of suspense and excitement is so much greater. It turns a regular lake into a whole feature that the player genuinely fears, yet also remembers, rather than the player feeling apathetic to the lake and whatever's in it. Even if nothing happens during the crossing of the lake, the context behind the monster being there and roaming somewhere in the lake that could attack at any time is enough to make this a fun experience. You may have another quest, this time in the ocean, where you have to retrieve a chest from a sunken ship. Cliché, I know. What lives in the ocean? Well, sharks, of course. But using the same principles as before, the sharks should not be ever present. They shouldn't be easy to find, easy to kill, and they should have a larger roaming range, meaning they could be anywhere over the length of the entire coastline. Instead, each shark should be something to be feared, and if possible, avoided. After all, it's a shark and you're in the water. They're not something you can just find in the same spot every time. All that means is you just get used to seeing them and you no longer fear the unknown. Like the real ocean, one may have a fear of sharks, yet most people never actually seen one in the wild, but you know they're there. The roaming range could be along the entire coastline and is a threat whenever you enter the water, so usually you keep your distance. But this time you have to retrieve a chest, so there's no way around it. You're going in. You almost make it to the ship when in the distance amongst the waves you notice that a fin is heading in your direction. Now you have a decision to carry on getting the chest, try and climb on the protruding parts of the sunken ship, return back to shore, or stand your ground. The options are yours, but surely this is infinitely better than seeing a shark in the same spot as it usually spawns, pulling it just because it's there and killing it within a few seconds of mindlessly clicking your ability rotation. There'll be common enemies in the sea too. Sand crabs may roam the ocean floor and eels or grouper fish might be frequent sights in the coastal areas, but the sharks are a rarity, yet a constant threat, making the place feel like a genuine place to be feared. In the woodland biome, there might be a giant spider that lurks amongst and in the trees of a massive forest. Like the Loch Ness monster, this spider is definitely something you do not want to mess with, as it can kill even the strongest of adventurers. There's only one in the entire forest and it roams all corners of it. You're there fighting bandits, and after a well-fought battle, you look up in the canopy only to see the spider waiting for you there the entire time. Luckily she was in a resting phase, but next time you may not be so lucky. You do not end up seeing the spider again, but you always remember this close call and forever have her in the back of the mind whenever you need to visit the forest in the future. Bears could also inhabit this forest. They're more rare than regular mobs, but not as rare as the spider. Some bears attack on sight, whereas others are just not interested. They're unpredictable, and depending on whether or not they're hungry, each bear maybe could have a slightly different monster ID. Some may be more hungry, some may be more aggressive, some may be curious, some may be scared, and they might wander off in the other direction. Keep it unpredictable, but either way you never know which bear is aggressive or not, so you usually keep your distance. It's a bear after all. Or instead of running, maybe you want to hunt down a bear, so you gather a party of adventurers to try and take it down. This is not a fight you'd want to do solo, so be careful when you're exploring the world alone. The steppes or plains could have worms that emerge from the ground. You're warned only by a slight rumbling of the ground and a message in your chat box reading, "You feel a disturbance below in the ground." Which direction it's coming from is your guess, but you don't stay to find out. I know the concept of rare spawns is already a thing in games, but these encounters should be treated less like typical rare spawns you find in games, and more like environmental enhancers. You're not necessarily supposed to kill the spider, or Loch Ness monster, or screeching bird. They're to be feared and to influence how you approach navigating the world. They don't necessarily have to have great loot. Not everything needs to be killed. It's a different way of looking at enemies and the environment and how you navigate this world. It makes it interesting. I'll give you an example of why sometimes rarity is really important in video games, and how this can influence your emotions in a certain way. In Minecraft, you've probably heard of the legend behind Herobrine. He's rumoured to be a hostile in-game mob that only a few players have encountered, but to their own demise. He looks like Steve, but with white eyes. People have speculated whether or not he even exists, and the consensus is now that it was indeed a hoax. But that hasn't stopped the thousands of videos being made around him, and creepypastas being made surrounding his lore. How many kids or even adults played Minecraft with the fact that Herobrine could show up at any time in the back of their minds? Yet despite not seeing him, this was enough to create genuine suspense when roaming the world. Now imagine if Herobrine was a common mob. There's plenty of Herobrines in the world and you usually bump into 2 or 3 of them per day. It's not very exciting, is it? It may as well be a pigman. The point is, it's the rarity and scarcity of Herobrine and the mystery of surrounding it that makes it exciting. And in this case, it didn't even exist. This leads me to my last points on mobs and bosses. Developers, please don't be afraid of players not seeing every single piece of content in a single playthrough. It's not a theme park and there's no point of actually exploring if everything in game is just handed to you on a plate. Some of the best zones in Dark Souls are hidden, with the community discovering them over time and allowing replayability for those who miss them. If the game holds your hand through every piece of content in game, there's no anticipation of finding the unexpected. Sure, you may have managed to run into the screeching bird, the Loch Ness monster and the spider in your first playthrough, but what else was lurking behind the corner when you trudged through the swamp or climbed through the sewers? Sometimes for enemy encounters, less is more. Abilities. I've decided not to delve too deep into this one, as when I was writing this section I realised that ability bloat really depends on the style of game. Some games could definitely benefit from more abilities, with others benefiting less. It's also quite controversial, with some believing that spells like Farsight, a shaman ability in WoW which allows players to see into faraway locations, just serves as ability bloat and is unnecessary and should be removed. Others believe it adds depth and RPG elements to the game that is fundamentally an MMORPG. Funnily enough, with the roaming enemy mechanics mentioned in the previous section, this ability may actually be of use to check around corners for unexpected dangers. In the current state of WoW, you may as well just run around the corner anyway. If there's an enemy there, you'll easily take it down within a few seconds, so what's the point of scouting? Others have criticised the sheer number of abilities and complex interactions and procs each spell has that interacts with other abilities which require to maintain certain dots on the enemy whilst being buffed by another ability which allows you to press this other ability after clicking another ability 3 times to gain another buff which allows you to hit another spell which... you get the point. You need to look up in-depth guides and use spreadsheets to calculate the optimum rotation, which sort of removes a lot of the enjoyment from playing when a game now feels like a maths class. Whereas classic WoW doesn't have quite the complex interaction between different abilities, but the combat is still definitely engaging and fun. Don't even get me started with a cluster of boss mechanics going on in retail WoW. Stand in the fire, don't stand in the fire, don't stand in the red fire, that's bad, stand in the green. Oh wait, for this boss green is actually poison and red fire is actually good. Sorry, I couldn't see it because of the red lava and the colour palette blocking the mess of colours on my screen. Make sure to only step on the red fire for 4 seconds though before moving to the purple pool on the floor. No, not that purple pool, that's somebody else's spell. Let's just take a step back for a moment. On paper, these flashy colours and abilities may sound really cool, but do they create a more epic experience in practice? I personally find my fight with Hogger on Classic WoW way more memorable than any raid I've done in retail WoW, and that's no joke or exaggeration. Yet look at it, it's a simple gnoll with little to no abilities. So how can this be? In retail WoW, you enter a raid and are met with a barrage of different colours and flashing spell effects. Distinguishing between which mechanics are good or bad is difficult, and sometimes you die thinking, what just happened? When it comes to fighting Hogger in Classic WoW, you're encouraged to find a small group to help you. Luckily, because everyone else is in the same boat, finding a group is relatively easy. There's usually somebody else doing the quest. You then band together, make sure your health and mana is full, and pull Hogger, using the tankiest guy in the team to take the brunt of the damage. Halfway through you may need to take aggro on the boss as the tank is running low on health. Another ad is pulled nearby and the Hogger still has a third of his health left. You frost Nova which freezes the ad but Hogger resists it. Luckily the warrior you recruited uses most damaging abilities and you manage to finish off the Hogger with little health remaining. The 3 of you then finish off the remaining gnoll and get the hell out of there before he respawns. You're aware of everything going on, but the intensity is still there. For me, this makes for a greater encounter despite the lack of complex abilities and boss mechanics. I couldn't end this section without mentioning old school RuneScape, possibly the most simple of any combat system, yet through its simplicity there is charm. At the higher end, there's still a large level of skill required, usually in the form of micromanagement, precise clicks, gear switches, prayer flicking, when to use special attacks, which equipment and inventory loadout to bring, when to eat, when to drink, where to move your character, understanding the game's tick system. This makes the game incredibly skill-based later on, despite looking basic on the surface. Players like this system so much that the evolution of combat introduced to the original RuneScape was the final nail on the coffin for most players getting up and leaving the game for good when it was released. This was an update that changed a simple combat system into a game with abilities just like WoW, but did not do it half as well. Sometimes for abilities, less is more. Questing and achievements. Developers should move away from getting people to stay because their players have a hamster wheel to spin, and move to creating games so fun and engaging that people want to come back, not have to come back. Fear of missing out mechanics are an example of this, such as limited time events offering rewards unobtainable after a certain period, or monthly rewards like Trader's Tender in Retail WoW. This does a great job of getting people to log in to claim their rewards for the month, I admit that. The flip side is that this can get very tiring and you feel compelled to finish the new battle pass or monthly challenge in order to gain the exclusive rewards. Burnout often happens within a few months and then you quit the game. The issue is, now you're missing out on all those exclusive rewards. After many months of having a break, you can't help but shake the feeling that you've missed out on so much there's no point of actually getting back into the hamster wheel. This has happened to me quite a bit. I don't know, what do you guys feel about this? Do you feel the same? Making content that's overly grindy and or in excess is also another example of games prioritising the quantity over quality content that makes you feel it's only being added so you've never run out of things to do no matter how monotonous the tasks are. I'm talking about spamming daily quests or even regular quests in an area where the quest is literally reskins of other quests you've done 100 times before, such as killing 12 boars or collecting items from mobs, or even achievements created for the sake of creating achievements so that players never run out of achievements to do. For me, this feels like achievements are always out of reach and catching up feels impossible, especially since you dare to have a few month break from the game. I'll give an exception to RuneScape. Maybe I'm a bit biased, I love this game, but RuneScape is probably the most grindy game in the entire world. Old school RuneScape at least, but to be fair, even RuneScape 3 is grindy compared to a lot of games. The developers literally made the level cap 99 require so much XP that they didn't expect anyone to ever reach it. Now here we are many years later with some people managing to max every single skill to 99. So we've established it's grindy, but why does this get a pass but the grinding mechanics of Retail WoW don't? It's because when you make progress in RuneScape, that progress is permanent. It's not going to be undone in the next patch with catch-up mechanics, and despite what people say, it doesn't have the massive gear creep like other games do. Yes, the gear is a bit better than it was 20 years ago. I mean, would you expect it not to be? But Bandos gear, which was released back in 2007, is still used by most max level players to this day. However, now the game has a better set of armour, named Torva. You may think that this makes your Bandos in the bank worthless, right? Think again. Many people cannot afford Torva, so Bandos will likely still be used by many players for a long time until they eventually upgrade. You also require a Bandos set in order to create the repaired version of Torva, meaning that Bandos still holds its value. In other cases, you have best in slot weapons specific to certain bosses, but for other bosses there's another weapon that's best in slot, meaning that instead of having vertical gear progression at max, it's more horizontal depending on the content, making your items that you already have still hold its value when new content comes out. Of course, item prices still do rise and fall depending on update, but your Bandos in your bank is unlikely to become absolutely worthless just because of an update, because the developers are consciously thinking how to avoid this from happening. And finally, the gear improvements added to the game are usually marginal, such as a 1+ strength over and above the previous tier, meaning that obtaining new items is technically an advantage but by no means essential. With regards to skilling, your progress is also saved even if you come back after a 3-year break. Your level 85 agility is still level 85. It's not become scaled down to 60 and the level cap has not increased past 99. Your achievement is not invalidated by future content releases either, as to avoid new skilling methods becoming too overpowered, they use a sliding scale of quickness, money, does it cost or make money, and AFK ability. Methods that cost a lot of money are usually the fastest, methods offering greater AFK ability are usually very slow at training. Bosses can gain you some experience, but it's not as efficient at leveling compared to killing regular monsters. On the topic of less is more, Jagex are not known for making thousands of updates in a year, and that's fine. They tend to think about every single update we release and even poll them to the players before. Because the game is a grind, I don't see this as too much of a problem, as I don't feel like I'm on a hamster wheel with no hope of ever completing the game due to a constant stream of filler content. It also means your items and skills, as mentioned above, are less likely to become devalued. And that, in my opinion, is the main issue with World of Warcraft and the biggest reason why I usually stop playing WoW. There's no point of grinding gear for months and months just for the next patch to make my gear irrelevant. Maybe it speeds up the next stage of the grind, yeah, but it may only save you a couple of weeks, yet it's taken 3 months to grind for that same gear, which is only giving you a minor head start in the next patch. The maths ain't mathing. At a certain point, you start to think, what's the point of even getting this gear this patch? It'll just be the same thing next patch, and I'll have to replace it again. I could talk about the issues with Retail WoW all day, but I'll save that for another video. Back to questing. The quests in WoW, and to be fair many MMOs, are very basic and usually consist of 1, maybe 2-step tasks which involve killing, gathering, or talking to a single NPC. If you're lucky, the quest may involve solving a simple puzzle. In fairness to WoW, quests have improved over the years, but let's compare this to RuneScape. Old school RuneScape has only 170 quests at the point of making this video, and has no daily quests to complete. In comparison, many other MMOs have thousands if not tens of thousands. This is not even including daily or weekly tasks. In my opinion, this is the definition of quality versus quantity. In old school RuneScape, you first have to get the requirements for a quest, which ranges from doing other quests first, getting skill level requirements, and gathering the required items. You then start the quest and go on an actual adventure, going to multiple different places, solving riddles, puzzles, or looking up a guide or getting a plugin to do it for you, killing multiple different enemies, with each quest taking anywhere from 5 minutes to multiple hours. The rewards are also very appealing, with some quests offering access to better training locations, good gear upgrades, new bosses and more. Last but not least, you have a quest log where you can track your quests and literally get a cape from completing them all. This is the same for achievement diaries, where the achievements are specific, thought out tasks which require different levels to complete, giving you something to aim for, with rewards to be unlocked at every tier. Although World of Warcraft has different variety of achievements to collect, half of them feel like a massive time sink, with many of them not offering any decent rewards, if any at all. I apologise for picking on Retail WoW a lot in this video. I don't think it's a bad game, but I do think WoW is guilty of a lot of things on the topic of prioritising quantity over quality. Just look at the mounts. Let's ignore the fact that many of them are bought from the store for a moment. Look at how many there are. Yes, there's a lot of cool mounts out there, but I've honestly reached a point where I'm no longer excited when I receive a mount drop. It's usually just a reskin of another one I have anyway. I felt a lot more enjoyment when I got my first ever horse mount in Elden Forest after grinding enough gold for it than I did my 312th mount I received from a random rare mob I killed, which by the way are not even that rare anymore. Moving on to the final topic, graphics. Generally speaking, we all prefer graphics to look nice. It's nicer to look at high resolution images than poorer ones, but ultimately developers have a budget, that is time and money, which they have to spend wisely. There's a couple of ways of looking at game visuals, style and graphics. I think we can all agree that style's important. If you look at old school RuneScape, WoW, Mario, Wii Sports, Stardew Valley, they all have completely different art styles, but it makes them stand out and feel unique. I'm not going to dwell on the art style too much as it doesn't really fit in with the title of this video, but what I will discuss is graphics. Look at the following graphics. Each graphic looks better than the previous, right? I agree. But how much better is this compared to this? Each image is better than the last, but the greatest difference is usually seen at the lower end rather than at the higher end. I'll show you a visualization. Although the graphics are improving, the biggest impact is actually seen at the lower end of the graphical improvements, with the benefits at the higher end being less obvious. This means that it's very important for the game to look good. If a game looks great, even better. If the game looks very great, then that's pretty cool. If the game looks very, very great, then I'd argue that it's also pretty cool, but it doesn't really add too much extra value than a game that already looks very great does. But this comes at the extra cost of development time and extra budget, which, let's face it, will likely be passed on to the consumer in the form of a more expensive game or extra microtransactions to try and recoup some more of the costs. I'm not saying graphics aren't good, but there's often more important things to focus on, such as gameplay or combat mechanics, or even systems. When budget and time investment is considered with regards to graphics, sometimes great graphics is great enough. Thank you everyone for listening. If you made it this far into the video, please consider subscribing, and I'd appreciate any video suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, I'll see you later.